It's a pleasure to be here with you today in this repurposed edifice. I want to talk about using architecture to express ideas. Ideas about the broad themes that hold us together as a people. And we're going to do this with the LSU campus, looking at the core, the original core of the campus. I want to focus on three aspects. First, the coordination of building forms and planning ideas, and the use of things like symmetry and hierarchy and massing and detail and color in a thoughtful and purposeful way. Second, the use of layered historical references, adapting the best things of the past to new uses while continuing traditions. And third, symbolism, or the development of meaning about the broad themes, relating the things that we do in these buildings to the broad themes that hold us together. Let's start off with a map of the campus. It's a big place, the campus, and at its core, shown in green here, is a National Register Historic District. There's a cruciform-shaped cluster of buildings shown in red there that we studied by means of a large Getty grant to do a historic preservation study a few years ago that initiated all of this. Now that red grouping of buildings at the core is what I want to talk about. It's organized along two axes, governing axes. There are four key terminal buildings, each developed differently to develop reciprocal sets of relationships and meanings. It was laid out by Theodor Link, a German architect working out of St. Louis, who we were fortunate to bring in here. So the four key buildings, the tower, the library, the old union or cafeteria, which we know as Foster today, and the flagship academic building, which is Atkinson. There's a Fonville Winans picture of LSU in the snow in the 1940s, and you can see how these axes work. The story begins with the circle. The large circle of the parade ground drawn on the ground. One of the oldest things that we do when we mark the environment. We make the big circle that reflects the wholeness of the sky and clears a space. The tower, then, is placed in relation to that, and it's all organized by a conceptual axis that draws the public in and relates the purposes of the university and its activities to the state as a whole. A cluster of buildings that surround the entry group, we can call it, that surround the tower, raised on a terrace, where originally administration and law and a host of other disciplines that have moved out to their own buildings. The model of Andrea Palladio, 15th century, 16th century Italian architect, is used a lot. Italian Renaissance became the basis for this campus. It was, originally there were ideas that it should be French or Spanish when it was first thought of in the early 1920s, and Italian Renaissance emerges as kind of a Southern European example with stuccoed walls and terracotta roofs and a rich body of tradition to build on. The Villa Badour by Palladio, you can see simple there, the idea of all the buildings coordinated, a central focus, hierarchy, symmetry, and focused detail in the center. That's the general model that we're going to be following today. So the first building's the tower, the Campanile, Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Tower, built as a monument to Louisiana's losses in the First World War. It's not the only one of those in the country. The official World War I monument in Kansas City, the Liberty Memorial, sits above the city, above Union Station. If you know Kansas City, it uses an Egyptian kind of style with Egyptian details. Egyptian architecture a lot of times is taken to mean ancient and timeless and that kind of thing. They use symmetry, axes, attention to detail, all the same sort of formal ideas that we're going to talk about today to accomplish this. Some very interesting sculptural panels and that sort of thing. In recent years, they've added, very skillfully, they've tucked a museum in under the building without disrupting it and greatly increased its functionality. Some of you may remember discussions about doing that here years ago, putting the LSU Museum under the Campanile. But we wound up with a nice example downtown. So the tower here, a vertical reach to the sky, a monument to service and to sacrifice, to those values necessary in a free society to provide a public education to the people. A starting point. Originally, the door in the center of the tower was open as a kind of a sally port. Rice University, if you know that campus, done a few years before, still has that open sally port that leads you in. Relates the form to the military traditions that are so important at LSU, especially in its past. Here, that was closed in the 1940s, but still has the memorial plaques and the bronze plaques with the names of all of the Louisianians who lost their life in the First World War. It establishes, and if you go and you look closely, you can see soldiers and sailors in bronze there as you walk in. It establishes this entry axis that comes from the parade ground, invoking the sky, leading through into the campus. The entry group of buildings that surround the tower contain more detail, more complicated massing, more ornament, beautiful colored lights, a series of really beautiful ornamental medallions that help to focus the attention on this particular spot. A 1929 photo there of the military demonstrations out on the campus, the parades and that sort of thing. So all the buildings that surround the tower, it's worth looking carefully. The medallions that describe agriculture, chemistry, engineering, and law. I don't know if you can see, but in this photo, the hint of Hill Memorial Library peeking out in the distance. It lies at the culmination of this entry axis. It's a very different kind of building. The tower's high, the library's wide. It's a building that's also meant to be read, though. Across the top, the large windows, arched windows marking the reading room, the great space of the reading room, open to the public. The three windows at the center marking an architectural motif known as the Palladian motif that shows up at various places, carefully located on campus in the library. It's a motif that originates in Rome, a monument to Hadrian at Ephesus there, but there are lots of examples that we could use. This repetition of forms. The building itself is a copy of the Boston Public Library, which was finished in 1898, not very many years before this library was built. The Boston Public Library was a building that transformed library design in the United States. The first significant free public library in the world, where you didn't have to be a member, you didn't have to pay money. All you had to do was show up and ask for a book, and you were given it to read in the reading room. And if you go, look, just over the entry, chiseled in stone, free to all. You know, in this internet age, this is a characteristic we take so for granted. But it's only 115 years ago that this happened. A great inspiration. Designed by Charles McKim, who studied in Paris at the École des Beaux-Arts and was inspired by the Bibliothèque Saint-Geneviève by André Labrouste, which was itself inspired in some ways by San Francesco and Rimini by Alberti. So again, this network of traditions leading their way up to the present. So Hill Memorial Library, designed as a repository of knowledge, a collection and preservation of knowledge. There was no state library, state archives at the time. The university was presented as the place where the state collected and preserved, generated knowledge. And that form sits there at the culmination of that axis after the encounter with the sky and that set of values. A wonderful drawing by my friend and colleague Van Cox of what was originally thought of as the fine arts quadrangle there that organized these associated meanings. So that entry axis is crossed by another, which is marked at its head by the cafeteria. Foster Hall, we know it today. It was used as a cafeteria only for about 10 years. It had two large, beautiful dining rooms. So in this photo taken from the terrace, you see the library, the little tower at Peabody that acts as a crossing, a marker of the crossing the two axes, an internal axis, a secondary axis that organizes aspects of the inner life of the university, if the other one organizes aspects of the university that relate to the people and the state. A Roman form, a Roman temple, grafted onto a Roman basilica form, surrounded by arcades that the architect originally labeled as cloisters on his working drawings. The drawing there is of Constantine's basilica in Rome. The first St. Peter's was there for 1,200 years. And what you see is an adaptation of some Roman forms. The forum that became the model for the cloister, and then the basilica. That form, the basilica, most of us know. It's still used for Christian churches around the world today. The Romans used the basilica before that differently, though. Instead of using it longitudinally, they turned it and used it crosswise. So you'd filter through it to go into the forum before you went to the temple and the temple front. And what it appears that Link has done here is collapsed a series of forms like that to make references to community, to shared values. And these were the great dining hall that was there that we've had trouble finding pictures of, by the way. And if any of you know people that have pictures of that from the 30s, please let me know. Student life and community at the head of that axis. That axis extends down from there along the quadrangle, a series of academic buildings marking the way. On the eastern side, on the western side, an agricultural group. You see in the photo, that agricultural group is organized, as are so many parts of this campus, using a simple set of geometric ideas. So that here, three major buildings. If you take the center, the fountain, and pull it up, it's organized in three pieces itself. If we take one of the side buildings and look at the way it's organized, again, three pieces. But then it itself is part of another composition of three. And then between, with the arcades, three. So you see where we're going with this. It's a symphonic kind of composition of numbers and forms that ripple across the entire campus, providing unity and diversity at the same time. Now, Prescott Hall, which is further down, is a little bit different. Similar along the end facing the quad, but a little bit different. And its form is repeated in Coates Hall, the chemistry group across the way on the eastern side, one large building meant to look like a series of buildings. And so you have similar elements that repeat and bounce around the campus. And we can go all over this campus and find this kind of idea operating. It's a system that comes from Thomas Jefferson as much as anybody else in the University of Virginia, where his great library, a half-scale model of another Roman building, the Pantheon, organizes the march of classroom buildings, each dedicated to a different discipline along the way, marking this secondary or internal axis. So that at the termination, so we've got at the termination of each of these, the tower and its associated buildings, Hill Memorial Library and its group, Foster, the cafeteria and its group, and at the far end, the flagship academic building at the time, Atkinson. Now, if we move in closer, it's a building that's also divided into this series of, or similar series of compositional ideas coming from Andrea Palladio. And there are lots of images from Palladio that you could pull up to see these kinds of compositional ideas. This is just one of his villas. At Atkinson, the rhythm of those windows, the steady rhythm of those windows that seem to mark, it's the only place classrooms appear like that along the quad, that seem to mark the rhythm of the desks, the students sitting at the desks behind that wall, or perhaps the rhythm of the soldiers marching on the parade ground, that sequence. And at the top, its own small campanile and its own dome with the ball raised to the sky there. It's a building that seems to speak to discipline, academic rigor that's necessary for a university like this to function. It's an Elmore Morgan photo of a student waiting to confer with his professor while looking down this 1,000-foot axis towards the student union or cafeteria in the distance. So let's recap that just quickly. If we go back and look at that diagram. An entry axis, sacrifice and knowledge. An internal axis then, from community to discipline, student life to academic rigor. A quad along the northern part, a fine arts quad. The body of it, a science and engineering quad. LSU is a school that dates from the mid-19th century where we were trying to incorporate sciences into public education. And then at the bottom, a smaller quadrangle around the mechanical shops where the knowledge created and generated by this university is applied back to the people of the state. It's the kind of thing we can do if we try. Thank you.